Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Jonathan Van Fleet. I'm one of the editors at the Monitor. This is Leah Willingham. She's the lead writer on the series. I wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight, and especially the panelists for their time here tonight, but also for sharing their stories with the newspaper and the community. Thank you. I know this is a difficult topic to write about for the newspaper and for many of us to talk about. And we talked amongst ourselves about what we would call this series, and we settled on finding hope. And we hope that the series conveyed that. And we hope that the people in this room tonight can find hope. The format is going to be a panel discussion. We're going to ask everyone a few questions, and then the second half, we're going to open it up to audience questions. And if you do not want to take the microphone and ask a question, you don't have to. There is a question box up in the foyer with white note cards, and you can submit a question, and we will be happy to ask those on your behalf. And finally, there are a couple serenity spaces in the school that the high school has been gracious enough to set up for us. And those are quiet spaces that if this conversation becomes a little too much for anyone, there's a space where people can go. And lastly, I would like to thank the Concord School District for giving us this space tonight for this dialogue. So, thank you.
Okay, we're going to have everyone introduce themselves. If you could just say your name and what your connection to this issue is, starting with Elaine at the end.
So thank you. I'm Elaine DeMello. I work with NAMI New Hampshire and the Connect Suicide Prevention Program.
Good evening. My name is Mary Forsyth-Tabor from Making It Happen, which is in Manchester. I'm also part of the Regional Public Health Network that focuses on young adult suicide prevention as well.
Hi, my name is Liz Siegfried. I'm a senior at Exeter High School, and I'm a Connect Youth Trainer.
Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Fontaine. I am an attempt survivor, and I'm also a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of New Hampshire researching college student suicide. I'm also active on the Yes Book Committee and helping to plan the conference, the annual Suicide Prevention Conference that will be taking place in Concord next week. Selfish little plug.
Good evening, I'm Martha Dickey. I lost my son Jason on September 14th, 2017 to suicide, and my brother Phil in 1981 when he was 24. And thank you for inviting me to be on the panel this evening.
Hello, my name is Holly Fenn. I'm co-founder of Reach One, Teach One, Love One. We advocate for mental health and suicide awareness and prevention, and I was led to do so because my son Dalton died at the age of 14 in 2009.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, for our first question, Elaine, I'd like to start with you. And I'd like to know, what do you think, which conversations, what are parents and teenagers not talking about right now? And how can they start the conversation? And if you could answer the question as you come down, that would be great.
Sure. So one thing I'd like to preface that with is that talking about suicide is an important topic, and you won't put the idea in someone's head. If you're worried that they're suicidal, you won't cause it to happen. If you don't talk with them about it, you may lose an opportunity for them to get some help. So if you're a parent of a teenager or any other young person that you're concerned about, you know your child. Keeping open dialogue is always important. We know sometimes that's difficult with parents of teens, but always making sure that they know that they can come to you and that you're not going to be judgmental about anything that they have to say. University of UNH years ago had a center on adolescence, and they did a study with teens, and they said, what is it that you look for when you turn to an adult when you need help? And they said the answer was universally two things. We want a person who listens to us non-judgmentally, but we also want to know that that adult is going to do something for us or about our concern. So it's really taking action in a loving and a caring way, watching for changes, watching for warning signs, and your kids will be great lookouts for others who are at risk, because oftentimes peers turn to their friends. And so it may not be your child at risk, but it may be your child saying, hey, mom or dad, I'm really worried about my friend, or I just saw something posted on social media. And so what we need to do is just create a safety net of caring adults and youth who know what to do and are ready to respond. We can talk more about warning signs, but I'll save that for later. There's information on the table out there that tells you what warning signs to look for and what kind of actions to take. But that would be the start. And know that if your child can't turn to you, there may be many other caring and responsible adults that they can turn to. So again, the more they have, the better, I think, in a world where we want to build a safety net.
Okay, I'm not sure how to follow that. Actually, I do. I have a 17-year-old son, and like a lot of people in this audience and some of the panelists up here, social media has become like a really big thing, in a 17-year-old's life. And so what I would say to parents is that if that's the normal thing for your child to do, I think you need to engage with them and ask them, make stuff up, because as a parent, I don't know a lot about social media, so I ask silly questions to get him to talk to me about social media and what he does on social media, which then starts dialogue. So find a way to start the conversation, and don't be afraid of that. And the other thing for a parent is, I've been doing this for 9 years, and every day I learn something new, so don't think you have to know everything to start the conversation. Pay attention to your kids and know what your kids' normal habits are, and if you see any kind of a shift in that, lean into that and just ask the questions. Kids really, as Elaine said, they just want you to talk to them, not judge them, and then help them find a solution together. You don't have to know the exact answer, but what they need to know is that you're going to lean in and help them.
I think as a teen, I know, and I can speak for many teens, that teens are very moody. And it's hard to tell when teens are acting out and cry for help, or they're just acting out just to get attention or do something else. I can speak from experience on that one. But I think that parents need to recognize that these signs in kids and need to know the differences and just pay more attention, because I know we all like our space, but sometimes you just need to be a little bit more invasive and say, hey, what's going on with this? Or is this real? Or were you just joking around? Is there anything left to say?
So I think for me personally, one of the things that would have been and ended up being helpful when I was struggling with depression and suicidality was just knowing that I had a parent or parents who unconditionally loved me. I think unconditional love is something that we kind of take for granted sometimes, and we don't often, make kind of overt attempts to display that. And I think just, showing that you care, even if it's not starting the conversation immediately. I mean, certainly have conversations, when the opportunities arise. But I think just fostering an overall sense of, as Elaine said, not being judgmental, just unconditionally, caring about your child and listening to their concerns. Particularly for children who might not have any outward signs that something is wrong. That was kind of how I was. I was a bit in the closet about some of the difficulties that I was going through. So I think, just always having that loving presence can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you just said about paying attention, and sometimes your child doesn't have outward signs. That was certainly the case with both my brother and with Jason, and I think as a parent in hindsight, trust your instinct, and if something's off with your child, you're probably right that you should probably dig in a little bit more, sometimes being invasive, and maybe, in my case, I always had open conversations with Jason. He was aware how my brother died. He knew it was a fear of mine, just in general, happening again in our family. So I think definitely trusting instincts, and if something's off, go with that and push a little bit more, and sometimes cross the line on being invasive and asking harder questions. And I agree that with what everybody else has said, that asking questions isn't going to cause suicide.
Okay, so I'm the last one. A lot has been said, and I agree with everything. In my case, I suffered from depression and suicidal thoughts for 15 to 20 years. I was very sufficient in watching my children for for signs of depression or anxiety. 2 of my kids had that. My son Dalton, however, did not. He showed no signs. And what I discovered as a parent, what I didn't do, though I was mindful of watching my children, I never talked to them openly about the importance of mental health. I never gave them coping skills. I just monitored them and introduced them to therapy when they needed it. Dalton, there were no indications at all. I think it's important to talk to our kids even at an elementary age. Today, for instance, I went online and I found a very inexpensive PDF that I downloaded. I have it on the table outside. And it's ways that kids can gain encouragement and understand how to cope with feelings of desperation or hopelessness in a fun and unique way. And I think we need to start that at a very young age.
Thank you all for your wonderful answers. A few of you mentioned warning signs, so I think if it's okay, I'd like to go back to Elaine, and if you could, maybe tell us a little bit about what a few of those warning signs that we could look out for are.
Sure, and I just want to say, having had the opportunity to hear everyone speak, that sometimes you can do everything right, and you still may have someone attempt or die by suicide. And so I just want to say, if you've lost someone to suicide, please remember that it's not your fault. Because if there was anything you could have done to prevent it, you would have done that. And I'd like to say, too, that with people who have taken their own lives or attempted, having worked with many of them, I think that if there was anything they could have done to prevent it, they would have too, but in that moment they simply could not see what their options were. So there are warning signs that we can look for. Maybe some of us closest to the person might miss them, but maybe somebody else will see them, and that's why that safety net is important, because we may not notice something, but somebody at school might, or somebody who's coaching them might. So that's why we think about training everybody, not just those closest to somebody at risk, but anybody who might have contact with someone. And so some of those warning signs would be, certainly we want to look for change. Our brains and our bodies are really good thermostats for what's going on with us. And when something's starting to emerge, whether it's illness or some kind of problem, mental health problem, we might see agitation, we might see more anxiety, we might see sleeplessness, or sometimes people sleep too much. We might see dramatic mood changes, as Mary was referring to. You might see people who start to feel like they're trapped, or they get obsessive about something that they feel like they just can't get over or they can't get out of. That hopelessness, that sense of nothing's ever going to get better. People might make indirect statements like, yeah, I wish I were dead, or you'd be better off without me. Or they might say something really overt like, if this happens, I'll just kill myself. And it might sound like a joke, but as people have said, we need to take that very, very seriously. So again, I encourage people to take a copy. There's plenty of them out there on the table it's a yellow sheet on the NAMI table that just lists the warning signs. And then what's important is not just knowing what the warning signs are, but then what do I do? And certainly you've heard us all say, lean in, talk to the person, be non-judgmental, but also keep a really close eye. And if you think something's going to happen imminently, don't take your eyes off the person. We say stay emotionally and visually connected to that person until you can get them to some help. And then make sure that they are safe. We'll talk more, I think, about lethal means and whatnot, but make sure they're in a safe place until you can have someone evaluate them.
Thank you. And I know, Mary, you work a lot in the field of substance misuse. Can you talk a little bit about how sometimes substance misuse can be a warning sign for suicide? Because that's certainly a huge issue that we're facing in the state right now.
Absolutely. So we're living in a time unfortunately, in New Hampshire in particular, where there's a lot of focus on the opioid crisis, and what that brings forward is all of the substance use that's happening from young people to our elders, right? And people self-medicate for different reasons. Some people are drinking responsibly, taking their medicine safely and responsibly, and then other people are, because of the hopelessness they're feeling, or maybe they're feeling isolated, are self-medicating to try to mask that, right? I'm okay, I'll just go ahead and whatever, have a drink or whatever. And we're starting to see that a lot with our younger generation and our young people. So the 18 to 25-year-olds are at a little bit of a higher risk because they're kind of free-falling from high school where you have that safety net to being out on their own. So we're starting to see a trend or a blur of a line where it's not just, you know, kids doing kid things or having parties and experimenting, but are self-medicating because of some anxiety or everything that Elaine said about hopelessness and not feeling like they can get rid of the pain, so they're trying to cover up that pain. So we're starting to see that blurred line. It's becoming harder to detect and try to pull apart what's really happening, and we're seeing that across the continuum, actually, from young people to elders and everybody in between. I would do work a lot with younger people and young high school and middle school and those providers that work with them, and it's a kind of a trend across that we're all trying to work together to try to delineate what's really going on with the young people. What we're trying to do in the Greater Manchester region, I believe it's happening here in Concord as well, is we're trying to get the partners to work together and educate ourselves about each other's specialty and being able to connect and do a warm handoff for anyone that might be at risk so that they're not getting dropped. So to Elaine's point, making sure that we're staying connected and getting the right people connected to both the families and to whomever is having the issue. That's, you know, it's no longer just you're doing underage drinking prevention, it's across the gamut. And we've been doing this for a while. When I first started doing it in Manchester, people were like, no, they're two separate things. And I'm like, yeah, they're all connected. Mental wellness is really key and important to all of every human, right? So from young people up to the elder adults who have a different kind of desperation and loneliness that they don't have when you're in high school level. So you do need to pay attention to that and substances. And to look at Elaine's point, if you are concerned about somebody, make sure that medication is stored properly and safely, and as well as alcohol at any age if you feel like somebody's in some trouble.
Thank you. Elaine mentioned schools when she was talking about, you know, people who might be able to see warning signs, and certainly sometimes our kids, or I don't have kids, but spend more time at school than they do, you know, maybe a parent could see a warning sign. So Liz, could you talk a little bit about the program that you're involved in at Exeter High School and kind of what your role is in that program?
Yeah, so I'm a youth trainer, as I said before. So we go into sophomore health classes and we teach about a lot of the things that Elaine was saying. And we spend a lot of time on warning signs. And we spend a lot of time on warning signs and prevention as well. So when we do talk about warning signs, we talk about things like that a lot of times connect directly with the students. So we talk about sports. Is the person pulling away from sports, and not just because they have a bunch of other stuff going on in their lives, or it's because they lose interest in their sport. Are they pulling away from friends? Are they saying they can't hang out anymore? Is it they were a this student, now they're a this student, and their grades are slowly slipping? Is it mood changes? So not only from happy to sad, but maybe from sad to happy, and not just one day, one random time, but of a continuous movement over time that you see. There's just their mood slipping and slipping. It's also just feeling like this feeling of just moving away from everything and everyone, giving away all your stuff, just kind of retracting into your shell. So when we talk about this, we say that it's simple things that people have to look out for, but it's not just one thing that people have to look out for, it's like the combination of things. So we really try to work it into these kids' minds as young as possible, that this combination of things is something that's really serious and something that we have to look out for. So that's what we teach people about in the summer classes.
And what do you teach kids to do if they see these warning signs in their peers?
So we know that I'm not a counselor, and of course these kids aren't counselors. So what we do is we teach them, we tell them to think of a list of who they're comfortable with talking, either if it's about them or if it's about someone else, and just think of all the people in school or all the people outside of school that they feel comfortable talking with, because that's the most important thing. And then we tell them, just go to these people. There are so many people in our school, whether it's counselors, teachers, your coaches, your priests, whoever you want, to just go talk to them and just explain to them what's happening, if it's about you, if it's about someone else, and I'm sure they'll get them help. So, and there's different protocols and stuff that we have too, that once a teacher or a counselor is made aware of the situation, and the warning signs seem like it's a combination of warning signs, that there is a protocol they will follow and get the student help.
Thank you. For Amanda, what are some coping skills that you have been able to develop through the years since your attempt that have helped you?
Why do I get the hard question? I think one of the really basic coping skills, and I say basic because I feel like it's something that I kind of went the majority of my childhood without, and I probably shouldn't have, but was just acceptance, self-acceptance, primarily. Being able to, acknowledge the fact that I am a human being, and human beings make mistakes, and they're expected to, and they're allowed to, and kind of, forgiving myself and letting myself off the hook for that. So I guess that's not really a basic coping skill, but more about just, being able to acknowledge that there are challenges in life, and even if you don't handle them the way that you would hope to or want to or expect to in the moment, that everything is just a learning opportunity and an opportunity for growth. So just being less hard on myself, I think, and also feeling more comfortable talking to people about it, because I think, as I said, I wasn't really somebody who showed these outward signs of distress, so it would have been difficult, I think, even, for people around me who were trained to look for warning signs. I think they would have struggled to see them in me, and part of that was that I had to kind of develop a sense of trust in others, and kind of be able to make myself vulnerable and, acknowledge when I was in distress, and really open myself up so that somebody, who was paying attention or who was asking me questions was actually seeing what's going on, that I wasn't just, hiding inside myself.
Thank you. I'm going to ask both Martha and Holly the same question. What did it take for you to get at a point where you could be open about your experience? And what does talking about it, because both of you have been very active and open about your experiences, what does that do for you to speak about it?
Honestly, you helped in our case when you reached out to us shortly after Jason had died, and actually I think it was 2, maybe 3 days after he was buried. You had reached out to me through social media, and I talked it over with Paul, and I think he was a little bit more reluctant at that point not to share. We were very open with the, how Jason had died, but I think your instinct is to protect yourself and your family, and it was so raw. You certainly made it easy because we were comfortable with you, and you handled our story and Jason's story so eloquently. What we hope to get out of it was exactly what I'm looking out at now in the audience: awareness, people paying attention to the topic, hopefully to be able to talk to other parents before they experience a loss by suicide in their family, Again, speaking about following your instincts, and Jason was an obviously undiagnosed mental illness. In hindsight, we know that now. But even just a couple of weeks before he died by suicide, he was acting very out of character for him. Just simple things, a little impulsive. He wasn't sleeping well. He was disheveled. He was always very well dressed, and he was very disheveled, and just things like that. That in hindsight, I wish that I had looked at differently. So I think for us, it helps to keep Jason's memory alive as well in the community, but I think really to help spread awareness and to be open about it so that we can help other people to hopefully not experience a loss like this.
Holly?
Okay. With me and our family, when Dalton died, we were in utter shock. The entire community was. People would often say if you lined up every kid in the town of Bow of the same age, he would be the last one in line that you would ever expect something like this to happen to. So what we did immediately, my husband and I, was we opened our doors to the wonderful group of kids that we still keep in contact with. We opened our doors and we just tried to show them love, and we supported each other quite a bit. But that's about as far as it went. I had to leave the community of Bow because it was painful for me going by, the practice fields where my son, played football and different sport activities, and just there were so many reminders. So I did have to withdraw and take time to heal. We moved south. And during that time, I knew that I would have to speak out because, this type of loss is just so horrifying, and knowing that other families might experience this type of feeling is just, it's so devastating, and it hits me whenever I hear of another loss in a family, which I'm sure you understand. And so I knew I had to take time to heal. And 2 years ago, just one November, one day it hit me like that, like, Holly, it's time for you to talk. And it was at that moment that I knew that I had to get out, speak publicly, and try to make a difference and make change and spread hope and share my son's story, because he was an incredible young person with a huge heart and soul, and I feel that I'm remembering him in a very wonderful way, and that's all I can really say.
Thank you. I wanted to ask everyone a question again, and if you feel comfortable starting, Holly, is what are some misconceptions that you feel like are out there about suicide?
Well, one thing that was touched on was the family is to blame. My husband and I did, my husband actually feels uncomfortable with this still, feeling that, that people blame us and the way we parented for what happened to our child. And having a child that died by suicide, personally, I can't go back and say what if and what did or did I not do. And it took me a long time to forgive myself for anything, just to realize that it wasn't my fault, that it wasn't me, and I was a good mom, and my husband's a good dad, and so I feel bad for people and parents that have not put that away, and in the back of their heads they think that they had contributed to this.
Thank you. Martha?
I agree with that, and then also I think another misconception is that it won't happen or it can't happen to just anybody, because I think that no family or no person is immune. I think how the community and how people approach resources and putting things out there to hopefully prevent it. And I also agree that I think regrettably people you'll always play a what if, I think, just in general, and I don't think it's necessarily guilt. Sometimes it's regret, or you can call it what you want, but I think that to blame yourself for any loss by suicide isn't the way to go. So I think that's definitely a misconception, but I think it's one that people have to process through themselves, like Holly said. And then I think another misconception is that mental health isn't as important as physical health, and I would almost argue that it's more important.
I would definitely second that. And I think for me, as an attempt survivor, one of the misconceptions that actually kept me quiet after my attempt was what I feel is the kind of misperception that people who have experienced suicidal thoughts or who have attempted suicide are somehow permanently damaged. That there's stuff that they then can't do. And I felt like I had really two parts to my identity. I felt like I had the person who struggled with depression for many years and who had attempted suicide and who at times had recurring thoughts of doing so again. I had that identity, but then I also had, my kind of burgeoning professional identity. I was in college as an undergraduate at the time of my attempt, but then I finished with my BA. I went on to get several master's degrees, and I'm a doctoral candidate right now. So it was just very difficult for me to reconcile, those two identities, because I feel like I kind of bought into the self-stigmatization as well. That I was like, no, this can't be. These two things can't coexist. But in reality, they can. And, struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts is not something that marks you as being permanently damaged, as being somehow unable to contribute in a meaningful way. And I think that, is kind of one of the barriers to treatment that people who suffer with those kind of, thoughts or behaviors experience. But I think that's just a powerful misconception. I don't think that's accurate, and I think my being here is perhaps in a way proof of that.
Thank you. Liz? So one of the first activities that we do when I do the training is we play a game called the brain game. So you have this little tiny brain, and it's called Why Don't You Talk About It? And so it's pretty much like popcorn. So you throw the brain to someone, they say why they don't talk about it, and then they throw it to someone else, and it goes around the class. And then usually we come up with a list of about 15 things of why don't we talk about it. Usually the first two things are it's sad and it's hard. And I think that's the part that my training comes in, is that we're talking about it, so it's not hard anymore, and it's not sad. It's just part of life. It's something that happens, even though it hurts a lot of people. It is something that happens, and if we treat it like it's something that's so far out of the park, it hurts so many more people. So we talk about that a lot in our training, that yes, it is sad and it is really hard, but you won't put the idea in their head, and you won't make them do anything. You're going to get them help, and that's the part that we focus on. So we have a lot of misconceptions, but those two usually are the first ones that come up. Thank you. Mary?
I think I need a new seat next time. So but she set me up really well, because what I am going to say is that young people in particular are ready to talk about this and are more open about talking about how they feel, especially to their peers. So it makes me very happy to be sitting next to you, to know that you're going into the high school, because that peer-to-peer support and that peer-to-peer dialogue is very different than it is for an adult to a young person. And I think those are important conversations to have. And what we've learned by working with young people and doing similar trainings that you're doing is that we're the ones with the stigma The adults are the ones with the stigma, and we can learn a lot from the young people because they will, if you give them the platform and you give them the opportunity, just as you just described, they will talk about it, and they will identify, the things that are stopping them or that they're concerned about, and we need to take some lessons from that. So I think the perception that you can't talk to kids, and there's some kids in the audience, young people, actually most of you are young to me right now, but specifically the younger people, they're not afraid to talk about it, but they do need the platform, and we need to give them as adults permission to do that, and we need to give ourselves permission to break down the stigma.
Wow. So now I'm at the tail end. Okay, so you guys are, you just nailed it all the way through it, all the way around. So Liz was talking about the hot potato activity, part of the Connect training, and it really is, there's so much stigma associated with suicide and with mental illness. And I think that reflects what Holly said, which is people blame the family, or they blame the girlfriend, or they blame... We want to find an answer, and there's just no simple answers. It's a very difficult situation, so the misconceptions are that somebody's at fault. And that's why I said right at the get-go, no one's at fault, not the person who took their life, not the person who knew them, or tried to prevent it, or couldn't prevent it. Certainly no one's at fault, but sometimes we even blame the person who took their life, and we say, what a selfish thing to do, right? I know a young woman who attempted suicide earlier this year. She said her friends shunned her and said, that was really mean of you to do that to us. Wow. So she said, I'm not inclined to tell anybody the next time, I'm feeling suicidal. So we need to understand that the person who's suffering in such pain, they don't necessarily want to end their life, but they want to end the pain. And it's not a selfish plan that they have. They think they're a burden to the rest of the world, and they think that by ending their life, they're going to take away that burden and take that pain away from themselves and everybody else. It's not true, because they're going to inflict pain, but they can't see that at that time. Their thinking isn't clear. So it's not a selfish act, and it's not something that anybody causes. Very often there's mental illness associated with it. The person's not thinking clearly. And so once again, I reflect on the parents here who saw or didn't see maybe some signs of mental illness, to understand that this is not something any of us would choose. It's something that can happen, but it's also something that can be prevented, and that's what the work that we're doing and the work that Concord Monitor is doing and all of us are doing, is to just be better aware, to not blame people, to not be afraid to reach out, and to make sure that we see and know what we're looking at and know what to do when somebody's at risk, just like we would if it was a heart attack. We don't ignore somebody when they say they have tingling in their arm and they're short of breath, and we don't say, well, suck it up, or come back tomorrow and let me know how you're doing. We take action, right?
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to mention to the panel, if any of you want to jump back in after we, just go for it at any time. The question that I have, and I guess I'll ask you, Holly and Martha, is 2017, we saw more deaths among young people than the previous 20 years. So clearly we need to do more as a state. My question for you is, what can we do as individuals? What can we do as schools, school officials? What can we do as a community to turn the corner on this?
Actually, just from what I've seen in the last year, I think we're starting to do it. I think this series alone has been huge, I'll say that. But the Connect program that is happening, and hearing what's going on with that, us going out and going into schools, people with personal experiences, so that the kids can put, a visual, see an actual human being that was affected by this, with safe messaging, of course. I think the celebrities that have been in the news that have taken their lives, I think that has helped contribute to how open people are now to talk about it, unfortunately.
I just want to ask you a follow-up because you mentioned safe messaging. Could you explain a little more about what that is? Like, are there certain things that we should make sure to avoid when talking about suicide, or things that might put someone at risk, or things we should definitely say?
Yeah. Well, for instance, I don't like to talk about how my son died. That does nothing. I want my son to be remembered for who he was and not how he died. No loss.
That's a good answer.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I think it's important to inspire people and not just, verbally dump sad news on their lap, but to inspire them and show them coping skills in different ways that we've gotten through what we have. I think that's important as well.
Martha?
Sure, thank you. I think for me, when I obviously reflect on 2017, that was when we lost Jason, the movement and the social awareness and the efforts to destigmatize, I think, I've already been impressed by that, and in no small part that's been the work of the Concord Monitor, many people at this table, and folks in the community. I honestly wish the governor's office would have something here. I don't know if he does, so if there is, I apologize for that, but I think that more engagement from our delegation would be helpful. I know personally I've written to everybody multiple times and have not heard back, and that's disheartening. I think in our schools, if we could duplicate what's already happening in some of the schools a little bit more. Jason was a graduate, so the school, for us, there was no letdown with that. But I think having the schools be more aware and opening their doors for sessions and forums like this. And I think when I reflect back on 1981, when we lost our brother to suicide, into 2017 and beyond, the efforts in the 14 months since losing Jason are monumental to me to see. And I do think that's, in part to social media making things more accessible more quickly, and people reaching out, to talk about it and to break down those walls and to not be afraid to have those conversations.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to Elaine. If a child goes to their parents and is saying that they're feeling suicidal, or a parent knows that a child has a history of attempts or suicidal thoughts, what are some specific things that they can do to give them coping skills, or to make the house safe?
Okay, we weren't really paying attention.
Oh, no, yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you had a bad time.
So who was that question directed to?
Elaine, but if you have thoughts on it, I'd love to hear those as well.
I just want to jump in to say that not a lot of people probably know about this, and we are actually trying to do a better job of this, but the state of New Hampshire does have a Suicide Prevention Council, which is a mandate, a federal mandate, and from that, so that's a big deal, right? So what do? We actually have many committees. I happen to sit on one of the committees, which is communication, and to your point, we're really trying to bolster the communication that's coming out from the state, and anything that's vetted and that's coming from the feds or coming up from the ground as things that are working and changing the conversation. We're trying to promote those through the subcommittee work, and if anybody's interested in that, we can talk after and get you information. There are subcommittees that anybody that's interested can jump on, but that is kind of a behind the scenes thing that happened, and I found out about it about 4 or 5 years ago, and I just like bulldog my way on. I'm like, I want to know what this is about. So be careful if you do that, because you get put on a committee. So that's happening, and also the state has an annual suicide prevention conference, which is a great opportunity because there's a whole variety of different workshops. And I'm happy to say, and sad to say at the same time, that today we found out that the conference is full. We are at capacity. It's actually next week. But there will be things coming out from that to the public, results of those workshops, and there's a lot of a very eclectic registration. So we have teachers and law enforcement and people that are in mental wellness and mental health, and people that are in substance abuse work. So it's very eclectic. So what I want to say to you is that the tide is turning and people are getting more involved in that to bring that conversation forward. So we're trying.
Mary, before we move on, if I were writing the state budget right now and the council was going to ask me for some money, how much money would you need?
Oh my gosh.
You've been waiting for that question.
No, I mean, I don't know that you can put a price tag on it because it's not a bucket of money. It's a system change, it's an attitude change. And so some of it costs nothing but to listen and pay attention and to learn. But obviously we could use more people that can go out to the community. We could use more trainers. So I think the budget would reflect that more than, a big dollar sign. I think what I would rather have from the state is a commitment to take this seriously and just spread it. And from the top down, the bottom up, that would be what I would ask for, which would be something that would be really intangible, but that's what I would ask for.
So I'll answer your question, prior question, if I could tag on to what people have been saying. We, with suicide prevention nationally and in New Hampshire, have made a lot of progress, and yes, we have people talking to each other and talking about it. Leah Willingham is an expert on safe messaging. We have people who are champions all around our state who are doing training or, taking leadership or putting in policies and procedures. But the one big hole still is mental health and mental health care. And, you said you wrote to representatives and you didn't hear anything back. We have people waiting in emergency departments for days on end to get mental health care. There's no other life-threatening condition that we would tolerate that for. And so we do need help from our representatives. We do need help from our state to fund services to make sure there's some things that are starting to be restored, but we have a long way to go. So people who need help need to be able to get that help right away, and they need to be able to have ready access to treatment and not wait for it. So I just wanted to mention that suicide prevention is going a long way with very little dollars right now because of all of you as champions, and we really are grateful for that. You've taken training, you've taken leadership, but we do have a service system that is woefully underfunded and not supported to the extent that it needs to be. So what would a parent do, if I remember the question now, what could a parent do? And I know that Leah was referring not just to what would you do one-on-one in terms of that connection with your youth, your child, or any member of your family for that matter. Not be afraid to talk to them about it, but please do talk about them, let them know that you're there. Ask them who else they want to talk to. Again, watch for signs on social media. There may be many different ways that they may be expressing themselves. And one very clear thing that people can do, and this is a research-based, evidence-based practice that anyone can do, is keep your home and the environment safe. Because when a person is in a suicidal crisis, they're not thinking clearly, and that crisis will peak. And in that moment, or those hours, or whatever it is that they're in that suicidal crisis, they may be looking for some ways to kill themselves. And you actually can prevent that suicide by removing those methods, because once that suicidal crisis passes, they're not feeling suicidal anymore. Hours later or days later, they may be in a very different place. And if they didn't have access to something to harm themselves with, they're not likely to die. So if you have a home and you're worried about somebody, if in your home you have pills, you have knives, firearms especially, there's no reason to not have a firearm except when you have somebody who's at risk for suicide. And we ask that you just consider getting that out of the house just temporarily because it's so lethal and so accessible. And we have more than 50% of the suicides in our state and in our country are by firearm deaths because they happen to be available and they happen to be lethal. We wouldn't let somebody who was under the influence take the keys to the car. We certainly wouldn't worry so much about it if they were sober, but when somebody's in an impaired state, we don't let them get near something that might be harmful. So do restrict or reduce access to anything that they might harm themselves, especially the more lethal items. So that is an effective strategy that's been well researched. And truthfully, you think about a young person, they're pretty impulsive and they can go from 0 to 100 pretty quickly, right? Like, oh gosh, my girlfriend just broke up with me, or I failed that test, or I didn't get into the college I wanted. And things can change very quickly, and when they're in that crisis state, they're not thinking clear, they may be impulsive, and we want to make sure that they're safe during that period of time until things settle back down again.
I think another thing too that was kind of mentioned earlier is that when talking about it, we want to make sure that you put the right message out there. So when talking about suicide, one thing that I've noticed you two talking about is you guys say died by suicide. So that's one of the things that we try to focus on in our lessons is we talk about died by suicide, died by the hand of suicide, things like that, instead of saying committed suicide, because that sounds like a crime, or some other things that make it sound almost glorified. And there's certain phrases that you should use and certain phrases that you shouldn't use, and especially when talking with your child or with someone else, you want to make sure you use the right phrase, because the wrong phrase could potentially make someone feel something different.
I'm going to put in a shameless plug in the lobby. There's this bright orange,
Green.
sheet that talks about what she just said about like how you can change your conversation, the words that you're using by just making some small changes. It changes the tone of your conversation and makes yourself more approachable. So look for that on the way out.
Reduces stigma, makes, it's more respectful, it's more sensitive. So even just the way we talk about people with mental illness, people with substance use conditions, people who have attempted or died by suicide can make a difference how we talk about it. So thank you, Liz. That's part of our safe messaging. And it's national. It's not just us. We didn't make this stuff up.
To add to that too, I think it's been really wonderful working with you, Leah, and knowing that the Concord Monitor is, I'm so engaged in this discussion and also committed to using those safe language and safe messaging techniques, because I think one of the things, as an attempt survivor, people they have this kind of like morbid curiosity, like, well, what did you do? What went wrong? And I think, like you were saying, Holly, that doesn't serve anyone to discuss that. It doesn't really add to the conversation. It doesn't, change the facts. It just kind of deflects the message onto something, that we don't need to be focusing on. So I think that's really great to see, a media outlet, particularly in our state's capital, who's committed to not, kind of satisfying those kind of morbid curiosities, but actually, focusing on the details and information that could lead to, inspiring hope and encouraging people to get help, as opposed to just sensationalizing a story and, kind of marketing someone's grief. So it's great to see.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for saying that. Thank you, guys. I just wanted to say, I think we're going to break for a few minutes and then do the Q&A, but I would not have done any of this if it weren't for all of these people who have been so brave to share their stories and to teach me about what are the safe ways to talk about this, what are the ways that are going to inspire prevention and inspire work in the community that's going to help people. And I think through working on this for the last year or so, I've never felt so confident that this is something that is preventable, and that there are lots of people working in this community who are going to make a difference, and just by sharing their story. So thank you guys, really.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Okay. I will walk around and take questions from the audience. I wanted to say a couple things before we do that. This is being recorded by Concord Public TV and is going to be rebroadcast in the future. So again, if you don't want to be on TV but you would like your question asked, the note cards are up front. Second of all, I wanted to let everyone know that the series and all of the stories can be found online at concordmonitor.com/findinghope. That is the short URL. All of the stories, all of the infographics, all of the videos are there. And hopefully that'll be a resource for people going forward as well. So I'm happy to ask any question from the audience, if anyone has them.
Hi, my name is Lori Fancy, And I was just kind of curious as to find out why we didn't have any principals from any of the schools here. For one thing, I think they should be here to understand what is going on, and for any questions that we as parents would like to ask what the schools are doing. Second of all, I have a grandson who had passed away, going on 3 years. I attempted suicide twice, and my brother has died from suicide. So suicide isn't something that is a sign that could be shown to everybody. Sometimes it's such a mask that person puts on. You cannot pick it up from anybody. Nobody can, if you don't want that person or anybody to find out about suicide, it's not going to be shown. I applaud the panels to be here. I know a couple of them here. I admire the young lady who is from the school here. I think more students from school should be on the panel as well and give their opinion what's going on. I think a lot of it has to do with bullying and what is the schools doing about bullying. And it's not just bullying in schools, it's parents bullying. It's being taught down. Not every parent bullies. It teaches their kids, but there is a lot of parents that bullies, and they show their kids how to bully, and that is unacceptable. And because of all of that, it just goes on and on and on throughout the schools, and the kids think that's okay because the parents think that's okay. And sometimes the parent could say, well, you know, that kid, you should be watching out for that kid for whatever reason. Nowadays it's because they're changing genders. Whatever the reason, no person should be bullied for any reason whatsoever. And what's going on television, what's going on in the music, that also has to be stopped and questioned. Why is there bullying showing?
Okay.
Why is it that the kids on television is beginning to show parents that they're ahead of the parents instead of the parents being ahead of that family? I think that's something that society is because of suicide, society is blaming.
Let's ask the panel. First of all, we didn't invite any principals to sit on the panel, but it sounds like the question is, what is the role of schools with parents about this subject? And please take it away. Elaine.
So, bullying is an incredibly toxic dynamic in our environment, and I totally agree with you that it starts with parents, and I don't mean, I guess I want to say it starts with adults. It doesn't matter whether they're parents or not. We need to be role models. We need to be role models, and I mean that on a national basis, not just here in New Hampshire. I think schools play an important role, but I'd like to just say that my personal position is when things happen with youth, whether it's drugs or suicide or whatever it is, we immediately turn to the schools and expect them to fix it or correct it. And they're only just one part. I think it's a whole community issue, and that we all need to be a part of it, and we need to create an environment that is safe, that is respectful. And when Mary showed you that little green piece of paper, little things can make a big difference in terms of how you use your words, what kind of language you use, and we can all do that, and it doesn't cost anything. I know there's people here and others that are doing a lot of different kinds of programs that are really grassroots kinds of programs around how we change the culture, how we change our attitudes, how we change the way we treat each other. And I'm really hopeful, and I know some of us are, that the young people are going to do it because some of the adults are stepping up to the plate. So I'm looking to the next generation. It's up to us, the adults, but I'm looking to the next generation to be the role models and leaders in changing the culture that we have around bullying and disrespect and that toxic stuff.
And I think also the schools should have, for like school openings, when they have their school class openings, to have parents sitting down and discussing about their positive outlook and pass it on to their kids, because any negativity passed on to the kids is creating bulliness. And I think schools should be, when they have their openings, have parents and discuss all of this. Let them be aware of that. That's only my opinion, and I think the schools should be here to represent them schools.
I think from my perspective too, being a graduate student at UNH, but also being a co-chair of the UNH Campus Suicide Prevention Committee, I can say that, for our school, for our university specifically, it hasn't been a lack of willingness to engage the conversation. It's really just been fear and uncertainty about what to do. And I think, going back to our earlier, question about misconceptions, I think, it's the kind of the idea that if we talk about it, if we mention it to somebody who's not actively suicidal, then we'll plant the seed, we'll give them the idea. Those kind of, misperceptions persist. And people just have fear. They fear that they're going to say the wrong thing, that they're going to overreact and, ignite a situation even more, or they fear that they're going to underreact. And then, of course, they, as our parents on the panel were saying, that they're going to feel that blame, that guilt. So I think it's something that schools can do, definitely. And I think what would really facilitate that is just a more like a general societal shift towards an openness and a willingness to talk about it and to, recognize that we might make mistakes. We might, not always use, respectful language. We might, trip over our words when we're trying to talk about things in a specific way, but recognizing that those are the first steps that need to be taken in order to open up the conversation and to get everybody more comfortable with it. So I think there's definitely things that schools can and should be doing, but I think there's also things that society can and should be doing more generally.
I think another thing too is just to point out your principal point of view. I know at least my principal is extremely busy, and that's no excuse for having him not be up here. But I think that having people who actually create the programs and are involved is almost a little bit more important than having principals, because they have so much going on with their school, and yes, it is their responsibility to protect their students, but I think having students try to protect each other and then having mental health specialists that protect the students is a way to ensure that they are almost more protected, because principals do have a lot of things to worry about, and I don't know if it would be at the top of their priority list.
And Liz, I have a question. After reading your story, it seemed like Exeter High School has a very open culture, and you've begun having these conversations. So what are some of the things that Exeter's doing that you think other schools could begin doing?
She's sitting right here. They're letting a student be trained and have a voice. That's one of the things that they're doing.
I don't know exactly what other schools in the state are doing. I think that our Connect program is very, very unique. And I know that having the breadth that it does, especially in a school as large as mine, is very impactful. Could you repeat that question? Sorry.
What's working at Exeter that other schools could start doing?
Yeah, so at Exeter, I think that we are a very inclusive community. We have 6 towns in my community, and so it's a school of almost 1,800 kids. But we really try to work together and be as much as a community as possible. So whenever something hits us, that's not you're from that town, so it doesn't affect you as much. We really try to talk to people, and we have counseling and stuff for people. And I think that this program and getting students involved is just honestly the most important thing, because I know some people don't listen to adults as much as they would kids. They would much rather have someone that's been in their shoes and know all the stresses that they've gone through telling them something, rather than a teacher being that was in school, like say 20, 30 years ago, saying you don't know what it's like now. And I think at Exeter we really focus that. We say, guys, we were in your shoes. We are now, we were a couple years ago, and I think that's the point that works the best, is just saying, we've been in your shoes recently. We know what you're going through. We're in the same boat, but here's what we're doing. Now you can do it too.
And something I just want to point out, and I'm not sure if Liz did mention this earlier, so forgive me if she did. I know she mentioned going into the health classes, but also Liz and her peers, they also put on a training every year before the school year starts to new teachers to teach them all of these warning signs, what to do if you see them, who are some people that you can direct students to get the appropriate resources and help. So that's a pretty impressive part of the
So the youth are
program.
training the adults.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? I told you they're going to come through for us.
Yeah, so we work a lot with, like, of course, we work with sophomore students in their health classes. But yeah, every August we do a teacher orientation that we train for. So it's all the people that are either switching jobs in the district or that are coming into the district. And we teach them this program. And every time you're a new teacher, you get this program. So I think that's really helpful too. I'm not completely sure if other places in the state have this, but I know that seeing people that are in your community that have this program is really helpful. I know that I actually taught my English teacher this program, and when I told her about this in the forum, she resonated with me and told me how helpful it was. So I think it's just really important to get out in your community and just teach adults, because they don't know everything, but it is.
We just act like we do.
Yeah, and it's also really impressive. For a lot of adults, we get a lot of compliments saying, "Oh, you're a kid, you're taking action," and helping us because we didn't know all these things.
And also, we didn't invite any principals from any other schools, but I also just wanted to say that I've seen at least 3 members of the Concord School District administration here, so I really appreciate that, and letting us use the space and even have this forum here is, I think that means a lot and shows something. We got a question.
Could I just add
Oh,
to
yeah.
that? So the Connect Youth Leader program that Liz is referring to is in dozens of schools around New Hampshire. For instance, Lakes Region, just about every school in that region has it. Mary's Region, a number of schools have done it. It's really, it's all over the state. So we haven't touched every single school, but we do have a lot of presence with youth doing this around the state. And some of them will be presenting at the annual conference next Thursday about what they're doing. The other thing, I just wanted to add another little anecdote. One of the students that was doing the training in Exeter was training cafeteria staff. And the cafeteria staff thanked the students and said, "We're so grateful to get this information because we hear stuff all the time that kids are saying, but we don't know what to do with it. And now you're telling us what we should do when we hear stuff when kids are at risk." And the kids said, "Yeah, because we don't say this stuff in front of our teachers, but when we walk through that lunch line, our guard is down and our filter's down, and we're saying all kinds of things that you're going to hear that are really important for you to know about." And that's why we say it's not just up to mental health, not just up to the guidance counselors, it's not just up to schools, it's not just up to everybody. Anybody could have contact with somebody at risk and needs to know what to do about it.
Another thing too, just real quick, sorry. We have actually changed the presentation a little bit just to fit more of what our students needs. So we have this section of the presentation where it's all pictures, but they seem like they were from the early 2000s. So it was
adult
yeah, it was very apparent that it was from the early 2000s. So when kids would see them, it was either they couldn't tell what it was, or they were just kind of ridiculing it and not taking it seriously. But when we changed it and when we added pictures that were more relevant to people's lives today, it made people realize the different scenarios. So you could have one kid 15 years ago that looks like this be at risk, but you could also have a kid now that looks like this who is also at risk. So that, making changes to that section, and we've had another story called Maggie's Story that we changed a little bit just to fit more of what people need today, and that the technology that we've been talking about today and how it affects people. So like cyberbullying and stuff, we do a quick little snippet on that and saying there's either you go with someone to get help or you go alone and get help, but changing the scenario so it was more relevant to people's lives, they could picture it in their heads.
Thank you. We had a question from the audience. It says, I'm 13 and I cut. I'm scared to speak out. What should I do? I don't know if there's anyone that wants to answer that.
I would start by saying you've already done it by letting someone know, and that's a really important path to getting help. Don't be afraid to get help. Don't be afraid, whichever direction you need to go, to get connected with somebody. Ideally an adult. I know we haven't said great things about adults, but we really are here for you. And a number of people are trained. Many people are there because they care, and if they don't know what to do, they will find out what to do. We also want people to know, and there's cards out on the table, that there's a national number that you can call. You can certainly call your community mental health center. You can call 1-800-273-8255. That's a 24/7 number that rings here in New Hampshire. And that's for anybody who's at risk or who's worried about somebody. There's also a crisis text line, 741-741. So if you can't approach somebody directly, know that there's many different ways to get help, and please do, because you've heard from people like Amanda who say you can get through this and things do get better even if it doesn't feel like that right now.
Right, we have on the Reach One table, we actually have bifold cards, and it gives that information that was just stated, and ways of keeping safe mentally and knowing the signs of suicide. So, please take care of yourself, and thank you for acknowledging that you are in trouble and sharing that with us tonight. You're very brave.
To that, I would also add, I would also add, it's great that you're recognizing these signs in yourself, and I think it's important to advocate for yourself, and you realize that you need help, and be adamant about that when you talk to, medical professionals, when you talk to family, friends, just be an advocate, a self-advocate. In my personal experience, some of the interactions I've had with medical professionals, it can be difficult, especially if you're not someone who looks like you're outwardly distressed. It can be hard to kind of convince people almost, that you're suffering, but you are, and your suffering is real. And don't ever let somebody silence that. Be adamant about that, and advocate for yourself to get the help that you need. And thank you for reaching out to us and for, again, being brave and sharing that with us.
Okay, now for another audience question.
My name is William Olbrich, and I have a question to anyone on the panel with regard to the possible means that individuals who fall into the dark side of things fall victim to. Is there one particular item that is first in the category, and then we go down the line to guns, automobiles, knives, whatever? What seems to be the number one characteristic that people fall into that brings about a possible suicide?
So what the methods that are used most, is that the
method? Are you referring to method, or what is it that leads people to be suicidal? Method.
So there's not just any one thing that can lead. Yeah.
What one should be the most characteristic?
I would say firearms.
Yeah. Well, firearms are the leading cause of suicide deaths, but that's because they're so lethal. But people will use what's available to them, and if they don't have a firearm available, they might use pills, but they would be less likely to die from taking an overdose. So there's more attempts by things like pills and cutting but less deaths because it's not as lethal.
We hear so much about the opioid issue and the victims of that particular issue. Is there a characteristic that brings that to each of the categories, or is that just a sideline issue?
I would say that people start to, probably without even knowing it, try to take the pain away and start to self-medicate. And I think then there is the potential, especially with opioids, we're very addictive, to get addicted to that, and it becomes this really slippery slope if you're talking about that specifically. But I think there's people that, just try to medicate through alcohol, any kind of like really at-risk thing to try to divert the pain. So I don't think that there's any one thing. It depends on your situation. What's available is, especially in the younger people, what's available for them to take the pain away that they're having, to mask that. So.
Which is why restricting access to those things is so important, because it really does make a difference in the outcome.
I hate to stay on this topic.
That's okay.
Is there any possibility that an individual who may fall victim to drugs, whatever they may be, that may at some point find that they're being controlled by a substance that they can't control? And if they discover that, they may drift into a position where they may want to exclude themselves so that they no longer are victims of this type. Is that a possibility?
Well, addiction is, it's a brain disorder, and it's very complicated and it's very individualized. So is that possible? Yes, it is possible, because what happens is people get hopeless. The same signs that we're talking about as someone that has a mental health issue and just feels like they can't get out of it. So we have seen a lot, specifically in the bigger cities, where people just, they try to get help, and something happens and triggers them, and then they slide again, and they just can't get out of the cycle. And it's really pain in a different form that can happen. Is it rampant? I would say no. I think it's really very individualized. Anyone that's becomes suicidal, it's very individualized. I think that's what makes this so tricky. There isn't something that we can all do that's going to save everybody, because it's very individualized. But that has happened, and I think the professionals that are working with people that have addiction disorders are starting to really hone in on that and really trying to be very well aware of that and trying to alert people to be on the lookout for warning signs. That's what we've seen in the region that I'm in. I don't know if you want to...
Elaine and Mary, I wanted to ask you a question about this, because at the high point of opioid deaths in New Hampshire was 400 or more. And yet, when we were looking at the statistics for suicide, it's a few dozen. Yet, at the end, for many people battling with an opioid addiction, they have essentially given up living. But those are not categorized as suicide deaths. Can you talk about how the numbers are counted and how do you distinguish one death from another?
So our medical examiner in the state is the one who makes the decision as to whether it's suicide or an accidental death or undetermined or whatever the cause of matter is. And overdoses are difficult to determine because you don't know what the person's thinking or intention was at the time unless it's so very obvious that they took an excessive amount and knew that it was going to kill them, or they left a note or they said to somebody, I'm going to take an overdose to kill myself. So there could be many overdose deaths that are not ruled as suicides, but as far as just those that have been, we haven't surprisingly seen a proportionate increase in suicides corresponding to the volume of overdose deaths. I don't know if you want to add anything.
That's exactly right.
There's an annual report that will come out very soon for 2017. We do a lot of work with data in New Hampshire, and that will be available on the Connect program website probably within a week or so. It looks at all of those different incidences, it looks at attempts, it looks at suicide deaths, but it also, I want to say on the positive side, it looks at all the initiatives and the work that's going on around the state and the things that we're doing to address suicide and related tragedies.
How does age and gender affect methodology and motives?
She's got it. Oh, she wants to take this one.
Okay.
Okay, go for it.
So, part of the Connect program is we play a game called Save a Life Game Show. And it's one of the favorites, I guess, in one of the activities we do because it is so interactive. And one of the categories is men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And it's actually interesting. It lays out a statistic. I don't remember the statistic, but men are more, four times? Okay. It says men are more likely to die by suicide by more lethal means, where women is not. So things like firearms and things and more deadly means, men are more likely to use than women. And as for age, I think that, again, what we were talking about earlier, it's anything that is accessible. So maybe as a teen, if you don't have a firearm in your house, then it might be more difficult to get a firearm. But honestly, if you have a firearm if you're 16 and if you're 45, it's still going to be the same level of danger.
And motives?
So motives, so for older people, it could be a lot more work stresses, maybe severe mental illnesses or something like that. But I definitely think for younger people, it's maybe just feeling like they're not getting the help that they need. No one is seeing them and seeing what they're going through. And so that's what we try to do, is just try to get them help. I don't know if that answers your question enough. But it's a lot of younger, it's the same issue most of the time for any age group, but a lot of times it's just depending on the situation and depending on what the student or adult is going through. So,
Nice job, Liz. Excellent job. The largest growing increase in suicides is among middle-aged white men across the United States and to some extent in New Hampshire. I will say that if you look at an age and a gender chart, and that would be in our annual report, you will see that older men are off the charts for suicide, and that's true nationally as well. And I would just make, this isn't scientific, but I would make some assumptions about that, which is not only do they use more lethal means, but they're much less likely to get help. And if you think about it, adults and older generations were taught that you don't go to a mental health center, you don't go get help for something, especially men versus women, right? Men are statistically much less likely to reach out and get treatment for health conditions, let alone mental health conditions. So that help-seeking dynamic makes a huge difference in whether people survive and live rather than die by suicide.
And just to add on to that, I'm going to put my researcher hat on for a moment. I think it's also important to consider, Elaine is exactly right that, that there is kind of a cultural stigmatization for males, to seek specifically, treatment for mental health related concerns. But there's also, been some interesting research done around that the medical field kind of has almost a bias in terms of treating men for psychological conditions, that because we associate, inward, kind of more inward facing disorders like depression with women, whereas we kind of, think of more externalizing behaviors as being common to men, things like anger, management issues, things of that nature, that actually when men do go in to seek mental health treatment, there's usually a concern for the physical symptoms, the physical manifestations of psychological distress, but men aren't actually referred to psychological treatment as often as women, even if they're displaying similar symptoms. So that's where it comes back to, what I was kind of suggesting before, was that there needs to be real self-advocacy on the part of anybody who feels, concern for themselves, for their well-being. If you're going to seek help, be adamant about getting the kind of treatment that's right to address the concerns that you have, because there's still societal misconceptions about how mental illness presents and how suicidality presents, that I think serve as kind of barriers to treatment for certain groups. And I think older males are certainly among the ones who are kind of disadvantaged by how the medical profession continues to view mental health.
There also is, in relation to that, small towns versus large cities have a very different disconnect too. So a man in a small town may feel more trapped and may feel like there's not as many resources for him to get his help, rather than in a city where there are like many mental health facilities or hospitals or something where they can easily have access to help. So location and definitely not only the size of your town, but I guess like where you are and how far it is to get to different places that can help you with mental health is also super important, and looking at the statistics.
In the North Country of New Hampshire, the rates there, because they are further away from resources and a number of other things, they're about the same rates as the states that have the highest rates of suicide. So that's certainly an issue that we see in New Hampshire, particularly in the North Country.
Given that the goal of this series and this meeting is to help instill hope in individuals on any side of this issue, I'm wondering what you might say to a young person struggling with suicidal ideation, or their caregivers, their parents, for example, to help instill hope in them in the midst of such difficult times. Maybe we could start with Amanda, if that's okay, given your experience. And what might you have, if you could go back in time, what might you have said to yourself and to your parents that might have been encouraging and helped you get through that process? And not just going all the way back then, but after the issue, and to help you move forward. And I'd love to hear from anyone else as well.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I would say, if I could speak to my younger self, I would probably say it gets better. Not a lot better. No, I'm just kidding. No, it does get better, and I think that kind of speaks to some of the, impulsivity of young adults, that kind of feeling that, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever, this is going to be the rest of my life, and it's not, I don't know that I would have believed myself had I told myself that, but I certainly would have said that. And I think I probably would have said something similar to my parents. I think it was, my personal experience was kind of, maybe unique in a way, because, I did have and I still do have very loving parents. And I think it's one of those cases where, they're so adamant and they love you so much that it's suffocating. And, I would say, please let me make mistakes and let me learn from them. And, let me know that I have you as an unconditional support to go to when I screw up. Because I'm going to, because I'm human, and we all do. And that's what I would have said to them. And it's taken, many years and some good therapists, but I'm able to say that to them now. And I think that's really important. So I hope that addresses your question.
One of the biggest problems with, if you're having a child that's going through that, is telling them, or anybody, doesn't have to be a child, it's a permanent problem for a temporary problem. It's a permanent solution for a temporary problem. Yes, you can always deal with it, but when you do that, it's permanent, and one of the reasons behind.
That's certainly true, and I think from my perspective, and we talked, amongst the panel a little bit about this earlier, about the kind of misconception that suicide is a selfish act, but it's really selfless. in a lot of ways. You know, when somebody is suffering to that point and they have such, you know, poor self-image and, you know, a poor sense of who they are and what they're capable of contributing, they really do see themselves as a burden. You know, and I mean, I was, you know, a straight A, dual major, you know, working 30 hours a week to support myself and pay for my own apartment. So I wasn't, you know, I was successful in a lot of, you know, the kind of ways that we would, you know, want people to be at that point in their young adulthood. And yet I still felt like I was burdensome, you know, so it's so complicated when the mind doesn't fully weigh and think about the reality and the gravity of the situation and the permanence of the solution that they're considering. You know, but I would just encourage, you know, to recognize that that's kind of a result of disordered thinking and not, you know, some kind of selfish, you know, intention of the person who's going through that.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Amanda, but in reporting on this, something that really stuck out to me is that I think as young people, we kind of expect, we have a problem, we expect it to be fixed like that. And I know for you, you went through different combinations of medication and therapy, and it took some time until you found something that worked. And I think a lot of people feel that frustration when they try a medication or they try seeing a therapist and it's not the right connection. They get discouraged and don't try another one, when really it can take some time to get there.
Exactly, and that's why I'm such a staunch supporter of self-advocacy, because, you know, you might be faced with people who, you know, who aren't coming to forums like this, who aren't, you know, exceptionally open-minded about, you know, mental illness and the ways in which it manifests and what to do about it. You know, so I think it's really important that people just advocate for themselves. You know, like I had to, and hopefully people don't have to. Hopefully we get to a point as a society where that's just kind of, you know, we're open enough and honest enough about the conversation that, you know, we can have, you know, professionals who are respectful and who are, you know, fully trained in how to address psychological distress. But I would say, you know, Leah's right, until we get to that point, it's really important that you know, kind of self-motivate and self-advocate.
And I would just add, if I could, so Amanda suggested, you know, it gets better if she could have said that to herself, but you can hear what a journey that is and what a struggle it is to get through that. And so we may need to say to somebody, I'm going to be here with you, you know, for as long as it takes until you can get there, because sometimes they can't get there by themselves. And the self-advocacy is great, but that takes strength, it takes, you know, a sense of self-empowerment, which they may not have at that point. So, you know, what we do is we walk with people and we say, I'll hold on to hope for you until you can find it for yourself, because you said this is about finding hope, and sometimes we need somebody to walk with us to get there.
Exactly.
Holly, Martha, would either of you like to address that question? What would you say to young people?
I think I would echo what I said earlier as far as the caregivers go, to trust your instinct and to question things that just might seem out of the norm. I think especially with you know, children or people that you care about that might have undiagnosed mental illness, and to really just, you know, lean in and trust that instinct and follow it through. Would if I could give advice to myself 15 months ago, that would definitely be the advice I would have given myself.
Answering this from a different point of view, I suffered from depression when I was in middle school. And I grew up with my mother and brothers, and back then we weren't allowed to talk about having any type of problem. My mother knew that I had issues, but I wasn't allowed to talk about them. And thankfully, something just kept me going. It was very difficult, and I actually was suicidal when I was in high school, and I never reached out to anybody probably until my 20s, when my doctor told me that I was clinically depressed, and that's when I learned about mental health. So I'm thankful that this generation is more open and they understand that there is mental illness and there is help, and I always encourage people to just reach out and really try to fight. You have to be your own advocate to get through this. You have to make the decision that you are going to overcome your mental health state, and you do have to be your own advocate.
I just want to say that what Elaine said is sometimes we have to have the hope for people. And I would say that to the parents too that are struggling, that might have concerns about a loved one. Sometimes it might feel like you can't get help or you're not asking the right questions, but you gotta be self-advocates for yourself too, and take care of yourself and keep pushing. And it sounds like some of you have done that. And it's not an easy road, it can be, every day is different, and who you're running into and who's talking to you can, swing it one way or the other, but don't give up. And if you feel like you need some support, then reach out to a friend and ask them to help you figure this out together. Get some support, because I don't want adults to think that they're on their own with this either. Find a buddy, find somebody. There's somebody in your community that can help you, whether it's a personal friend or someone through the mental health system that we have here, that get an advocate to help you navigate forward for yourself as well, because you need to be strong as well, and you need to have support.
So I just would tag on, and that's what NAMI is there for, National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's all about people helping people who've been through it. So if you are a family member and you're struggling, as Mary said, you're not alone. If you don't have a friend, or even if you do, NAMI can be there to provide education, to provide support. You can come to groups, you can come to classes, you can just meet with us one-on-one. And everyone you talk to will be someone who can say, I've been in your shoes, I've been through this. So we're there for you. There's green cards on the table out there. Please take them and utilize us as we can help you any way we can.
I think we have time for one more question.
Are there mental health facilities within the state of New Hampshire that afford a person who recognizes their current trouble or depressed, they can walk in and ask for help and be granted a period of so many days in order to resolve a moment of illness?
I can't answer that, but the person that was going to ask the next question can help you with that.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Ryder, and I'm the president and CEO of the Mental Health Center of Greater Manchester, and I'm a resident of Concord. My wife Gail and I raised 3 kids. Been in this auditorium many, many times for school events that my kids were a part of. I have to say this is probably one of the most profound events I've ever been in this room. I want to congratulate the Concord Monitor for being a media organization that brings the community together. They've done this on other occasions, and this has been really powerful. I'd like to thank the Concord School District for hosting this and being so active and proactive in our kids' lives. And my kids had a great education, and they're all, productive adults. It wasn't an easy road always to get there. And I want to say to the parents that 3 things. One is that we have to start at an early age to explain what life is all about, how it all works. Because the things that a young person perceives gives them a misperception of what life should be and how it should be experienced. And just simple discussions about that in non-crisis situations, just a normal, everyday conversation can help create something called resiliency. And you teach your kids how to be physically resilient as parents in terms of sleep, hygiene, in terms of eating, and so on. We need to teach them psychological resiliency, and that starts there. And then explaining even the paradigm of the parent and what the role of the parent is and what really the role of the child is, and about the paradigm of growing up, so that when you are in the middle teen years and the teen years, that when there is conflict between the parents' desires and the kids' desires, you can refer back to the paradigm then it kind of gets that out. And then the third thing is that if you have more than one kid, none of them, A, came with a owner's manual, and B, I don't know how it works out this way, but they all get the same genetic material, but they're all totally different. And so you might think that what worked with one should work for the others, and it doesn't. You, as a parent, you have to be very fluid and flexible so that you can adapt your style of parenting to give that child the best support possible. I wanted to speak because cutting and suicidal urges are a very, very treatable condition. There's a program that we have at the Mental Health Center of Greater Manchester, and I believe they have it at Riverbend too, called dialectical behavioral therapy. It's an evidence-based practice, and it's specifically designed for people who cut and have powerful suicidal urges. It's focused on 4 things. It's focused on mindfulness, it's focused on distress tolerance, it's focused on emotion regulation, and it is focused on interpersonal effectiveness. These are the strategies involved in dialectical behavioral therapy. So if someone, as it was questioned tonight, is feeling that they're cutting and it's discordant and it's worrisome, there is help available. Both in Concord and in Manchester, to answer the gentleman's question, there is a 1-800 number that you can call, and there are mobile crisis response teams that can come out to your house and meet in a neutral area. Both mental health centers have walk-in, non-emergency room capabilities. You really just have to call. Both organizations, Riverbend and the Mental Health Center of Greater Manchester, have places where people can be in terms of crisis beds that are non-hospital based, that give people sort of a cooling off or a respite. There are services available, and I'll be around if anyone wants to talk to me about those, and I can give them numbers and things like that. But we have a powerful treatment modalities that can really help people and get great outcomes. And I do agree with Amanda that if you encounter a mental health professional and it doesn't seem like it fits, advocate for a different one. It would be the same if you were going to a dentist or a doctor or anyone else, that it has to be a right fit for the person.
Thank you. Nice tie. I was going to ask one final question of the panel, and this will be kind of the speed round question.
Let's go.
If there's one thing you want people to know or walk away with tonight, what is it?
There's hope, and there's help.
Ditto.
Very speedy. If you recognize the signs, then you can connect the person to help.
Don't ever give up.
You're important and you matter.
You are much stronger than you would ever expect to be, and you can get through anything. Don't give up hope.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. And
And now we have one quick announcement from a new group that is starting in Concord called Concord Together. They're going to be meeting monthly to talk about mental health issues. So take it away.
So first of all, I'd just like to thank Concord High School and the Concord Monitor, as well as our panelists tonight. I found your insights to be extremely valuable and helpful. I really think Concord Together has emerged as a movement as a result of some of the recent losses and incidents that the Concord community has sustained. And our aim really is to bring members who have become, or individuals who have become isolates in society back into the light and let them know that people still love them and people still care. And a few of the things that we've recognized is that one, suffering is one of the truest things that we know to exist in this world, and that 2, community membership has been declining for the past 2 decades, whether that be in sports or extracurricular activities, anything. And that 3, a real stigma does exist around things like the opioid epidemic or anything that falls under the umbrella of mental health. On November 13th, we'll be hosting an event here from 6 to 8 p.m. And we'd just like to remind you that your voice is extremely valuable. And while this movement is very green and admittedly naive navigating through this space, we'd love for you to attend, and we only hope that we could replicate something as beautiful as the event that you guys have put on tonight. So if you could help us on that endeavor, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our presentation.